So we're really beginning to have an understanding of how we can approach layouts using CSS. What I like to do in this movie is look at a way that you can control the location of content within your layout. We're going to be taking a look at something called relative positioning, which is a very common way to position content within your layout. So this isn't for page layout, but rather positioning content within your layout. So what I'd like you to do inside the Files panel is switch over to the photography website that we set up earlier. Remember, what that website uses is the exercise files that you downloaded from our site as the local site folder. In there is a folder called Chapter 8, and if you expand it, there's a file in there called Relative Positioning. If you go ahead and double-click it to open it, you'll see that we have two different elements. And what I'd like to do is come into the split view so we can see both the code and the content visually. You'll notice that we have two div elements, and in each of these div elements, we have a paragraph element. Furthermore, we have some internal styles already set up. We have a div rule, which is controlling the appearance of the div element. We have things like background color, width, height. We have a little bit of margin down here towards the bottom, which will create some space between the two elements, and then a border property. For the descendant selector that's targeting the paragraph element within the div, we're just really controlling the appearance of the type. You'll notice that we have a line height of 150 pixels. This gives us the ability to position this text in the center of the box. If we remove that, it would then be tucked up here towards the top. So there's a general overview of what's already been set up. What we want to start taking a look at is something called relative positioning. So in order for us to look at that, what I'd like you to do is double-click the Files tab to collapse that panel. Inside the CSS Designer, we're going to create a new rule. In fact, what we should probably do is make sure that this div element is selected, and the best way to do that is to put a blinking cursor inside of it. In the tag selector, you can choose the div element. What I'd like you to do is give this an ID, and we're going to give it an ID of element 1. Now that this has an ID, we can come over to the CSS Designer. We can select the style source, which means we're going to be writing this selector in this document specifically. Down towards the selectors section, I want you to click the plus sign, and it should automatically type in that ID for you. If not, go ahead and type it in and press enter or return. So we've already looked at a lot of these properties here for layout, especially when it comes to margin and padding, but we haven't talked about position. Now, position, like I said, gives you the ability to manipulate an individual element within a layout. And what we have are several different options in terms of the position. We could go with something like static, absolute, fixed, or relative. And what we want to focus on in this movie is relative. Relative gives you the ability to create offsets from certain areas within its parent container. You can create an offset from the left edge, the right edge, the top edge, or the bottom edge. Now, we're going to talk about absolute and fixed in greater detail in the next movie. It's a little bit different because if you choose something like absolute positioning, you're going to remove the element from normal document flow, but that's not the case with relative. Finally, there's static, which is essentially the default. So you would really select static if you're trying to override an inherited CSS value. So like I said, for our purposes right now, we're going to come over and choose relative. Now, it's relative to the parent container in terms of this element's location, and you can create offsets from its parent. So if we were to come over here and type in something like 150 pixels for the left property and tab away from it, you'll notice that it's pushed out 150 pixels from the left edge. You could do the same thing for the top. If we come over and add 150 pixels from the top, it's pushed down 150 pixels. So as you can see, you're probably not going to assign values for all four sides. It doesn't really make sense to do that. In the majority of situations, you're going to go ahead and assign a value to one, maybe two of the properties. The key here, though, is understanding that it's not removed from normal document flow. Let me show you what I mean. If I come over and remove this top value, and you can do that by clicking the trash can or typing in 0. If we come back to the top section of the layout category and change its height, let's go ahead and set it to a pixel value of something like 200 pixels, you'll notice it pushes element 2 down. So we're still working with this content in normal document flow. It's not picked up off the screen like when you float something. So relative positioning gives you the ability to set offsets from its parent container. You'll typically use relative positioning to control content within an overall layout, but not for layout itself. You'll also use it in conjunction with absolute positioning, which is something that we're going to take a look at in the next movie.